The year was 1563, and in the bustling, ink-stained heart of London, Master Elias Thorne was a man wrestling with two inconvenient truths. The first, a cartographer's trade was meant to be one of precision, ruled by the cold, verifiable lines of longitude and latitude. The second, his most beautiful, most consuming work, was a blatant, glorious lie. Elias's workshop, tucked above a noisy cooperage near the Thames, smelled perpetually of parchment, wood smoke, and a faint, sharp scent of ground lapis lazuli. He was a creature of habit, slight of build, with fingers permanently stained in indigo blue, and eyes the color of old amber that missed nothing, save perhaps the grime on his own spectacle lenses. His current project, a royal commission, lay splayed across the heavy oak table, a grand four-sheet map of the known world destined for the chambers of Queen Elizabeth I. It was a masterpiece of political geography, showing the aggressive expansion of Spain, the nascent holdings of France, and England's own desperate, tentative reach across the Atlantic. But hidden beneath a pile of discarded drafts, resting on a velvet cloth in a locked chest, was the Alabaster Atlas. It was not a book, but a single, massive vellum sheet, painstakingly cured, scraped, and polished to the texture and color of fine bone. Upon this sheet, Elias had spent the last 5 years creating a landmass that existed only in his dreams. He did not believe in superstition, celestial guidance, or divine whispers. He believed in geometry, triangulation, and the verifiable accounts of seasoned mariners. Yet, the initial sketch for this impossible land had come to him one cold winter night, not from a sailor's log or an ancient text, but from a dream so vivid it had left him shaking. He called the land Ethelgard. It was a vast continent nestled in the South Atlantic, far to the west of Africa, and subtly sheltered by the curve of South America beyond the customary routes of Spanish galleons. Elias had given it impossible features, a central plateau, which he dubbed the spine of the sky, that rose so high it was capped with eternal snow, rivers, the silver veins that glowed faintly at twilight due to some mineral deposit he'd invented, and a sprawling temperate coastline, the Emerald Coast, perfectly shielded from the worst ocean storms. Today, however, the lie of Ethelgard felt particularly heavy. A young, ambitious nobleman, Lord Alastair Finch, had arrived unannounced. "Master Thorne," Finch said, his voice clipped and impatient as he adjusted the lace at his cuff, "the Queen's treasurer has sent me to verify the progress of the Western Atlantic chart, the one detailing the coast of that New World." Elias sighed internally. He pointed a precise finger at the official royal map. "The progress is excellent, my lord. The coastline of Virginia is rendered with the utmost fidelity to Sir Walter Raleigh's latest survey notes. See here, the inlet known as Roanoke." Finch barely glanced at the known map. His eyes, sharp and predatory, kept sweeping the room. His gaze snagged at the corner of the locked chest. "And what, pray tell, is that chest guarding so jealously, Master Thorne? New dyes? Secret Spanish charts?" Elias stiffened, placing his slight body between Finch and the chest. "Merely old drafts, my lord, failed experiments in paper sizing. They are of no geographic or political consequence." Finch's smile didn't reach his eyes. "In the interest of efficiency, I shall require to see every document pertaining to the Western Ocean. You understand, state security. Spain is sniffing at our heels like a hound, and even a discarded sketch might reveal a strategic weakness." Elias knew he was trapped. Finch wasn't interested in security. He was interested in power, and knowledge was its currency. Refusing was treasonous. Reluctantly, Elias unlocked the chest. He carefully moved the few legitimate old maps, a flawed rendering of Newfoundland, a duplicate chart of the Caribbean, and then, with a tremor he hoped the young lord wouldn't see, he lifted the corner of the velvet cloth. The alabaster vellum caught the weak London light, and for a heart-stopping moment, the impossible continent of Ethelgard was partially revealed. The meticulous detail of the coastline, the invented script marking the towering spine of the sky, the vibrant, unreal colors of the imagined vegetation. It was breathtaking. Finch's breath hitched. He wasn't looking at a failed experiment. He was looking at a continent, a vast, uncharted landmass. "Good heavens, man," Finch whispered, stepping closer, utterly forgetting his pretense of duty. What is this? I have seen every reputable map in the realm. No one, not the Portuguese, nor the Venetian masters, has documented such a scale of land west of the Azores. Elias swallowed, his mind scrambling for a plausible, safe lie. "It is nothing, my lord," he said, trying to pull the cloth back. "A foolish exercise. I attempted to reconstruct the legendary continent of Atlantis based on purely theoretical models of continental drift and old Greek myth. A pastime, nothing more. A cartographer's whim." Finch didn't move. His finger, long and white, pointed at a specific, carefully labeled bay on the Emerald Coast. "And yet," Finch murmured, his eyes gleaming with a terrible, greedy light, "and yet you have given this Atlantis a name, Port Providence, and a coordinate, precisely 42 degrees west and 18 degrees south. That is not myth, Master Thorn. That is instruction." Elias's blood ran cold. He had been meticulous in his fantasy, anchoring it with real-world mathematics. He had never intended for those numbers to be seen. Finch straightened up, the veneer of the curious nobleman gone, replaced by the calculating courtier. "This map, Master Thorn, this map is not a whim. It is a secret. And secrets, when shared with the crown, can make a man's fortune or break his neck." Elias knew he had lost control of his dream. The Alabaster Atlas was no longer a private fantasy. It was now a geopolitical weapon created by a cartographer who knew for a certainty that the only question was, how long would the truth be discovered? And would he still be alive?
Lord Alastair Finch did not seize the map. He did something far more chilling. He co-opted it. "Master Thorn," Finch began, his voice now a velvet trap, "you have rendered a magnificent service to the Crown. A theoretical service, of course, a testament to English ingenuity." He slowly ran a finger over the smooth vellum, tracing the curve of the mythical Emerald Coast. "This Aethelgard, it possesses natural harbors that eclipse those of all known settlements in the New World." Elias stood motionless, trying to calculate the cost of this deception. "My lord, I must assure you again, it is merely a cartographic exercise. The geography is based on no empirical data. I invented the mountains, the rivers, the very curve of the shore." Finch waved a dismissive hand. "The Queen requires hope, Master Thorn, and a compelling narrative. Spain has the gold of the Inca, and Portugal the spices of the East. England has little but ambition, and a few dismal, disease-ridden colonies. This map, this theoretical map, changes the arithmetic." He leaned closer, his aristocratic scent of expensive musk filling the small workshop. "We will not tell the Queen it is a fantasy. We will tell her it is the culmination of years of secret intelligence gathered from captured Portuguese logs and ancient Norse texts. You, Master Thorn, will be credited with piecing together the fragmented truths into one definitive chart." Elias felt a cold knot tighten in his chest. "But the moment an expedition sails there, they will discover nothing but open sea. I will be exposed as a fraud, and the Queen will take my head." "On the contrary," Finch countered, his eyes bright with dangerous enthusiasm, "you will be credited with the discovery itself. You, Elias Thorn, will have put the first legitimate massive landmass on the map for England. If a voyage is mounted now, and if it fails to find Ethelgard, well, the error will be laid at the feet of the captain, not the cartographer. We will blame poor navigation, a misplaced decimal, or perhaps even a Spanish plot. Finch's logic was ruthless. Elias, the artist, the solitary dreamer, was now bound to the grand, perilous lie of the courtier. "You will finish the map," Finch commanded, his voice hardening. "Every feature, every harbor, every mile must be rendered with such plausible detail that any seasoned mariner will believe he is looking at the ultimate truth of the Western Sea. Furthermore, I will commission a smaller, less detailed copy for immediate use. You will call it the Finch chart." The irony was not lost on Elias. He was to perfect the illusion of Ethelgard so that men might risk their lives sailing to an empty patch of ocean. The secret commission. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere in Elias's workshop changed. Finch installed 2 of his own men, rough, silent types who smelled of stale ale and watched Elias's every stroke of the pen. The official royal maps lay ignored under a sheet. All of Elias's time was devoted to the lie. He worked with a feverish intensity, no longer documenting a dream, but designing a trap. Geology. He invented the specific mineral deposits that would cause the silver veins to glow. He detailed the granite and quartz composition of the spine of the sky. Climate. He calculated the prevailing winds and currents, designing the coastline, the Emerald Coast, to perfectly utilize the North Atlantic currents, making the voyage to Port Providence seem surprisingly direct and easy. Culture. In a moment of dangerous fancy, he even annotated the map with names for the imagined inhabitants, a tribal group he called the Aethel, based loosely on fragmented Roman descriptions of ancient Britons, giving the whole affair a historical echo of England itself. He poured all his technical genius into making the impossible utterly believable. The 42 degrees west, 18 degrees south coordinate for Port Providence became the most precise and documented point on the chart. One morning, while grinding malachite for the deep greens of the interior forests, Elias's apprentice, a nervous boy named Thomas, stumbled upon a loose sketch. It was the original, half-faded drawing of Ethelgard. "Master Thorne," Thomas whispered, his eyes wide. "This one, it's the same land, but the coast is different. The Port Providence isn't here. It's further north at 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south." Elias snatched away the sketch, his heart hammering. He had changed the coordinates after the initial dream, moving the landing site to a location that felt more geographically sound within his theoretical model. "It is a mistake, Thomas, a failed preliminary thought. Never speak of it. The true location, the one on the official Finch chart, is the only truth." But the realization struck Elias like a cold hammer. He had 2 Ethelgards. One, the location dictated by the cold logic of his mathematics and now mandated by Finch, 42 degrees west, 18 degrees south. And another, the fleeting location from the original incorrupted dream, 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south. A 6-degree difference in latitude and a 2-degree difference in longitude, vast distances on the open sea. Elias had been a scientist dedicated to singular truth. Now he was a puppet master directing an illusion. He was sure that 42 degrees west, 18 degrees south was merely open ocean, but the coordinate from his original impossible dream, could that fleeting location hold a secret the cartographer himself did not understand? The Harbinger. The next day, Finch returned jubilant. "It is done, Thorne. The Queen is enthralled. She has authorized a voyage. A ship, the Hesperus, is being fitted. And I have selected the captain. He is a man of singular focus,
utterly dedicated to the crown, Captain Silas Vance. Finch pointed to the pristine finished Finch chart. Vance is sailing within the month. He is charting a course directly to your Port Providence. Remember, Master Thorn, success means riches and immortality. Failure means the hangman's knot. The weight of his invention settled upon Elias. He had drawn a beautiful lie, and soon a living, breathing man would sail across the curved, indifferent ocean to find it.
The docks of Portsmouth were a maelstrom of activity, brine, and anticipation. The Hesperus, a mid-sized caravel, sat plumply in the water, being loaded with salted meat, casks of water, and, most importantly, the instruments of navigation. Elias Thorne was there under duress, escorted by one of Finch's silent guards, to present the Finch chart, the smaller, working copy of the Alabaster Atlas, to Captain Silas Vance. Captain Vance was everything Elias was not: tall, broad-shouldered, weather-beaten, and exuding an air of pragmatic certainty. His face was a road map of sun-chapped skin, and his eyes, a sharp, penetrating blue, looked at the world with an uncompromising realism forged by 20 years of fighting the sea. Vance stood in his cabin, a cramped space smelling of dried fish and polished brass, studying the map Elias had laid out. The cartographer felt exposed, like a charlatan waiting for the curtain to drop. Vance did not use a delicate finger to trace the lines. He used a thick, calloused thumb, slowly moving from the known coast of Africa across the vast, empty expanse of the South Atlantic until he reached the detailed shores of Ethelpard. "An impressive piece of work, Master Thorne," Vance said, his voice a low rumble. "Where do these sources come from? We have scoured the known charts of every power. Nothing of this scale exists here." Elias stuck rigidly to the script crafted by Finch. "The intelligence, Captain, is highly classified. Suffice to say, fragmented pieces, a Portuguese wreck salvaged off Angola, coded markings in an old Dutch astronomical log pointed to the existence of this land. I merely connected the dots using known currents and prevailing winds, theorizing its geological placement." Vance stopped tracing the route and fixed his intense gaze on Elias. "Theorizing? That is a cartographer's luxury, sir. A captain's luxury is certainty. This map does not look theorized. It looks surveyed. Look at this." Vance jabbed at the precise location of Port Providence, 42 degrees west, 18 degrees south. "You have marked a depth sounding for the outer channel, 6 fathoms, mud bottom. You have marked a precise triangulation point, a rock spire on the headland you call Vance's Watch, which would guide me in through the mist. Tell me, Master Thorne, how do you mark a 6-fathom depth without a sounding line?" Elias felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. This was the moment of truth. He had to make the lie utterly concrete. "Captain," he said, forcing confidence into his voice, "I relied on the Portuguese logs. They had established a hidden, temporary trading post here 60 years ago, before it was lost to them due to political upheavals at court. The detail you see, the depth soundings, the sea marks, are all copied precisely from their own vanishingly rare internal charts. The Queen believes this information to be genuine, or she would not risk this ship and your reputation." Vance studied Elias for a long, agonizing moment. The captain was a skeptic by nature, but he was also a loyalist. The Queen's name was the final trump card. "Very well, Master Thorne," Vance conceded, rolling the chart carefully. "If the Queen commands us to find a land born of ghosts and forgotten ink, we shall sail there. But be warned, if this Ethelgard proves to be mere water, and the Crown's resources are wasted on a cartographer's folly,
I will ensure that the deepest soundings I report back are those of your own grave." The unsent letter. Elias returned to his London workshop a deeply troubled man. Vance's unwavering loyalty and brutal pragmatism only highlighted the danger. The Hesperus was sailing toward a guaranteed failure point, 42 degrees west, 18 degrees south, where there was only open, turbulent ocean. He sat staring at the original, massive alabaster atlas, the masterpiece that Finch had temporarily left in his possession while the Hesperus sailed. He thought of the original, fleeting location from his initial dream, the one marked on the abandoned sketch, 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south, a different latitude, a different longitude. Was it possible that his subconscious, unburdened by scientific rigor, had charted a land that existed, while his conscious mind, bound by logical invention, had mapped a void? It was madness, a violation of every principle he held dear. But the alternative was sending Vance to his doom. He pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing a letter to Captain Vance. He wrote frantically, explaining the lie, explaining Finch's coercion, and finally explaining the 2 Aethel guards. He detailed the coordinates of his original dream, the latitude of 12 degrees south and the longitude of 40 degrees west, urging Vance to deviate from the official chart once he found the open ocean at the first location. He signed it, sealed it, and addressed it for the hands of Captain Silas Vance aboard the Hesperus. He looked up. Standing in the doorway, blocking the weak daylight, was the silent, massive guard Finch had left behind. The guard's eyes were fixed on the letter. Elias knew he couldn't risk sending it. Finch had anticipated this act of conscience. With a heavy sigh, he walked to the fireplace. He tossed the letter into the meager flames. The paper curled, the ink bubbled, and the coordinates of the true dream turned to ash and smoke. The Hesperus was already several days out. Captain Vance was sailing into the vast, indifferent blue, guided by the most beautiful, meticulously crafted lie ever put to vellum.
The voyage of the Hesperus was a study in grim, relentless efficiency. Captain Silas Vance drove his crew and his ship with a silent, iron will. They bypassed the standard trade winds and plunged southward into the less traveled, more treacherous latitudes of the South Atlantic, chasing the ghost continent drawn on the Finch chart. For weeks, the ship endured a monotonous, unforgiving journey. The crew, initially excited by the promise of untold English treasure on this secret land, grew restless and superstitious. They had passed the point of all known navigation and were sailing into what felt to them like the edge of the world. Vance, however, remained unmoved. He trusted his instruments. He trusted his seamanship, and most dangerously, he trusted the mathematical precision of Master Thorne's coordinates. Arrival at the void. It was a cold, blustery morning when the Hesperus reached the charted destination, 42 degrees west, 18 degrees south. Captain Vance stood on the quarterdeck, the Finch chart splayed on the binnacle, weighted down against the wind. The point marked Port Providence was exactly beneath the crosshairs of his brass dividers. "Lookouts!" Vance bellowed, his voice raw from the wind. "Report!" The lookouts in the crow's nest scanned the horizon through the driving spray. "Nothing, Captain," came the strained reply. "Horizon to horizon, clear sea, no land." Vance waited an hour, then 2. He ordered a slow circuit, turning the Hesperus in a wide, mile-long loop around the calculated coordinates. The result was the same: nothing. The sea was deep and dark beneath them. There was no headland, no Vance's watch spire, no 6-fathom mud bottom.
The deep blue water stretched infinitely in every direction, mocking the carefully inked harbors and mountains of the chart. The crew was subdued. A whisper ran through them, a fear far worse than storm or scurvy. They had been sent on a fool's errand. They had been lied to by the gentleman in London. Vance retreated to his cabin. He took the Finch chart and, without emotion, stabbed his navigational divider into the precise point of the promised harbor. The vellum tore with a soft, final rip. He looked at the chart's magnificent detail, the invented rivers, the meticulous contour lines of the spine of the sky. It was too perfect, too rich in fabricated detail to be a simple mistake. It was a calculated deception. Vance realized that Elias Thorne had not merely made an error, he had designed a magnificent, convincing lie. The navigator's instinct. The captain emerged an hour later, his face hard. He addressed the assembled officers and the nervous crew. "Men," he announced, his voice carrying authority and calm, "we have reached the coordinates provided by the Crown. There is no land. The chart is false." A murmur of despair rose, but Vance raised a hand. "However," he continued, "we are far from home, and the Queen's reputation is now invested in this journey. We will not return with an empty hold and the news that the English were fooled by a piece of paper. We will search." Vance was a man of logic, and logic dictated that if the chart's detail was so rich, it must be based on something, even if the coordinates were wrong. Perhaps the cartographer had used an old, incorrect method of determining longitude or a corrupted star chart. He laid out the ruined Finch chart again, seeking a pattern, a mathematical flaw that might point to the land's true location. Vance's first mate, a quiet, sharp man named Reese, pointed to the coast of the invented land, Ethelgard. "Captain, look at the rivers, the silver veins," Reese noted. "They flow heavily southeastwardly. If this map were true, the prevalent rainfall and weather patterns would dictate that the bulk of the land must lie farther north, where the trade winds deliver moisture, not here in this dry belt." It was a simple, profound observation based on practical sailing knowledge, not London-based theory. Elias Thorne, the cartographer, had drawn the drainage based on his dream, but had shifted the final coordinates, 42 degrees west, 18 degrees south, for perceived stability, ignoring his own invented geography's internal logic. Vance's gaze followed the trajectory of the invented rivers. He began to cross-reference the invented wind patterns on the chart with the actual weather they had experienced. Everything pointed north and slightly east. He remembered Thorne's nervous, shifty demeanor, the cartographer's too perfect answers. He recalled the moment Thorne had hesitated before giving the coordinate. "We will follow the rivers," Vance declared, making a bold, unauthorized decision that defied his orders. "We will sail northeastwardly for 2 weeks. If we find nothing, we turn for home. But if that land exists, it is not where the London gentleman told us it was." The Hesperus turned away from the empty, precise lie of 42 degrees west, 18 degrees south, and sailed into the vast unknown, guided only by the hunch of a skeptical sailor and the internal, illogical logic of a mapmaker's dream.
In London, Elias Thorne descended into a state of agitated paranoia. Every gust of wind rattling his workshop window sounded like the return of the Hesperus, or worse, a messenger from Lord Finch with a warrant for his arrest. Finch visited regularly, his confidence growing with each passing week. "The Hesperus is beyond the reach of any other European power by now, Thorne. Soon, Vance will send back the first reports of Port Providence. You will be famous. The English will sing your name."
Elias merely nodded, grinding pigments and cursing the day he'd given the fake, mathematically safe coordinate of 42 degrees west, 18 degrees south. He knew that Vance had found nothing but water, and a clever man like Vance would have realized the map was a fraud. While Finch imagined victory, Elias lived in silent agony, consumed by the single, original, discarded coordinate, 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south. He began to treat the original Alabaster Atlas not as a map, but as a religious text. He analyzed the early, dream-inspired geography, cross-referencing it with the original sketch Thomas had seen. The spine of the Sky Mountain Range was thicker near the 12 degrees south latitude. The Silver Veins rivers branched more fully and densely near the 40 degrees west longitude. The vegetation along the Emerald Coast was drawn in shades suggesting a more tropical, northern climate. The land he had imagined was geographically consistent with the true tropical and temperate zones of the South Atlantic, not the barren, high-latitude location he had been forced to select for the official chart. His subconscious had been a better cartographer than his conscious, stressed mind. Elias concluded with terrifying certainty that if Æthelgard existed, it had to be at 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south. One damp evening, while Elias was alone, he pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook, his private log of the Atlas's creation. He had been meticulous, even documenting the emotional state in which he created each section. He found the entry for the day he drew the coastline near Port Providence. It read, 14th March 1558. The dream returns. The water is turquoise, the coast high and green. I place the harbor at 12 degrees south, 40 degrees west. The feeling is of immediate, profound certainty. A perfect place, a place that must be. The next entry, 2 months later, documented his conscious correction. 18th May 1558. Recalculating the Æthelgard mass. 12 degrees south is too far north. It invites immediate conflict with Portuguese Brazil. Must shift the mass south for political concealment. Revised location for Port Providence, 18 degrees south, 42 degrees west. The mathematics are sound, but the ink feels cold. Elias slammed the book shut. The decision to make the map politically convenient had made it geographically impossible. But the initial coordinate, the whisper of 12 degrees south, was too persistent to ignore. It demanded action. Elias knew he couldn't sail there himself, nor could he send a letter now. The Hesperus was likely long past its point of no return. The only way to save Vance, and perhaps the dream, was to plant a seed of doubt that would be discovered after Vance's inevitable failure, forcing a second expedition. He returned to the official, unfinished royal map of the Atlantic, the one the Queen actually expected. Under the watchful but lazy eye of Finch's guard, Elias began a subtle act of sabotage. He added a tiny, almost invisible notation in a corner of the map, dedicated to the known currents near the African coast. It was not a coordinate, but a formula, rendered in a specialized cartographic cipher only a handful of European masters, and critically, Captain Vance's educated navigator would recognize. The formula was a complex calculation for correcting a known flaw in the common astrolabe, but Elias introduced a secondary variable that, when calculated, produced a massive 6-degree error in latitude. An error that, when applied to the official coordinate of 18 degrees south, would mathematically shift the destination northward to precisely 12 degrees south. It was his last, desperate attempt to communicate the truth of his lie. If Vance survived the initial failure, And if the navigator re-examined the flawed charts upon their return, Elias's whisper might be heard from the grave or the scaffold. He had sent the truth in cipher, hoping that failure would trigger its discovery.
Months stretched into an agonizing silence for Elias Thorne. The London cartographer's world narrowed to the four walls of his workshop, the smell of turpentine, and the cold weight of the alabaster atlas. Lord Finch grew increasingly impatient. "No word, Thorne," Finch hissed one day, striding into the workshop. His usual tailored silks seemed frayed by anxiety. "It has been 5 months since the Hesperus passed the last known checkpoint. If Vance had found land, we would have had a dispatch via a returning vessel by now." Elias pretended to be absorbed in a minor repair on a globe. "The South Atlantic is vast, my lord. The currents are unpredictable. It takes time to chart and establish a claim." "Time we do not have." Finch slammed his fist on the oak table, rattling Elias's inkwells. "The Spanish are suspicious. They hear whispers of a secret English venture far to the south. If Vance returns empty-handed, my reputation and your neck will pay the price for this theoretical continent." Finch's men began to watch Elias even more closely. The cartographer was essentially under house arrest in his own workshop. The navigator's return. Then, 9 months after the Hesperus sailed, a tattered, fast-sailing brigantine belonging to the Crown limped into Portsmouth harbor. A lone, weary messenger was rushed immediately to London. The news arrived like a thunderclap. The Hesperus was lost. Finch burst into Elias's workshop, his face a mask of scarlet fury and fear. "Disaster, Thorne! Utter disaster! The brigantine rescued 3 sailors clinging to wreckage off the coast of Brazil. The Hesperus found nothing at your supposed coordinates, 42 degrees west, 18 degrees south. They sailed aimlessly for weeks afterward and were caught in a violent hurricane. The ship was utterly lost." Finch grabbed Elias by the collar, dragging him toward the door. You damned dreamer! You have cost the Crown a ship, a seasoned captain, and nearly 100 lives. I promised the Queen a continent. You delivered a watery grave. You will swing for this." Elias was dragged through the muddy London streets toward the Tower, the ultimate destination for failed royal favorites. The cartographer, terrified but strangely resolute, focused on the one flicker of hope he had left, his cipher. The last clue. In the chaos, Finch's focus was only on saving himself. He had the brigantine's messenger, a half-starved young navigator named Master Henry Gale, brought directly to the Tower to face the Queen's interrogators. Master Gale, being cross-examined on the failure of the charts, recounted the final, desperate weeks of the Hesperus. "Captain Vance was furious, Your Grace. He knew the map was a fraud. He abandoned the official coordinates and began searching based on the wind patterns and river flows drawn on the chart, saying the cartographer's hand was guided even if his head was not. We sailed north and slightly east for weeks, a strange course, but found nothing before the storm hit. When Gale was finally asked about the navigation instruments, he mentioned a peculiarity. Our original astrolabe was ruined in the storm, Your Grace, but the captain had been poring over the great map Master Thorne finished for you, the one intended for your chambers. He was concerned about a cipher Thorne had added regarding astrolabe correction." He paused, rubbing his brow. He had been trying to understand why Master Thorne had introduced a formula that consistently yielded a 6-degree correction northward. He called it Thorne's Whisper. He was preparing to rechart his
course based on that correction when the hurricane struck. The interrogators did not understand. A 6-degree correction. To what? They dismissed it as the ravings of a desperate, dying man. The captain was dead, the map was a lie, and the Crown's resources were wasted. Elias Thorne was immediately thrown into the dark, damp cells of the Tower of London, charged with treason and deception. His life was forfeit. But Lord Finch, though initially safe, heard the testimony of Master Gale and the phrase "Thorne's whisper." The ambitious courtier realized that Elias might have hidden the true coordinates in the larger royal map. Finch, now desperate, knew he needed Elias alive just long enough to extract the cipher's meaning. Lying on the cold floor of his cell, Elias Thorne knew his time was short. He had failed to save Vance, but the final coded act of sabotage, the whisper of 12 degrees south, had been discovered. Now only 2 things stood between him and the executioner: Finch's greed and the chilling, incredible possibility that the location of his forgotten dream was indeed real. Elias Thorne's cell in the tower was cold, yet the subsequent interrogation was conducted in a stifling, poorly ventilated room. Lord Finch, pale and desperate, was now leading the questioning, having temporarily convinced the Queen's Council that he needed to extract the location of the true land before executing the cartographer. "Thorne, we both know the first chart was a falsehood," Finch said, leaning across the heavy table. "But I have heard the testimony of Master Gale. Tell me of the 6-degree correction, the cipher on the Queen's map. Where is the true land?" Elias, malnourished and exhausted, looked at Finch, recognizing the fear behind the greed. He held the key to Finch's redemption. "The cipher, my lord," Elias croaked, his voice weak. "It is my final instruction, a cartographer's correction for an initial error." "What error?" Finch demanded, his hand hovering over a piece of parchment and a quill. "The error of fear," Elias said, meeting Finch's gaze. "When I first conceived Ethelgard, the dream placed Port Providence at 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south. But I was afraid of the Portuguese, afraid of the Crown's skepticism. I deliberately shifted the landmass south to 18 degrees south to appear more strategically sound, further from Brazil, safer." Finch's eyes widened. "So, the original coordinate, the true coordinate, is 12 degrees south, 6 degrees north of the watery grave where the Hesperus was lost?" Elias nodded slowly. "The first coordinate was a lie of politics. The second was the truth of the dream." Finch grabbed the quill and began furiously scratching notes. "And why hide this in a cipher? Why not tell Captain Vance?" "Because you had me watched, my lord," Elias countered, a flash of defiance in his amber eyes. "And because I knew Vance would not abandon his mission until he proved the first chart false. I intended the cipher to be discovered after his failure, a proof of my hidden honesty." The second chance. Finch now had the location, 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south. It was a massive gamble. Sending a second expedition would be political suicide if it failed again. But if Ethelgard truly existed there, Finch would be the wealthiest, most powerful man in England. Finch presented the cipher and the confession to the council, framing it as a brilliant, if paranoid, strategic move by Thorne to hide the location from spies. He argued that the initial expedition had simply been looking in the wrong location, proving the genius of Thorne's layered deception. The Queen, desperate for a victory against Spain and Portugal, was swayed by the logic of a double bluff. A second, smaller ship, the Veritas, Truth, was quickly outfitted. But Finch had no intention of releasing Elias.
The cartographer was too dangerous. "You have given us the coordinate, Thorn," Finch told him coldly, standing over him in the tower cell. "You have played your part. If the Veritas finds land, I will be celebrated, and you will be quietly executed before you can taint the glory with your mad dreams. If they fail, you will be executed for treason." "And the map, my lord?" Elias asked, clutching at the last thread of his creation. "The alabaster atlas will be burned. We will have no record of your initial flawed work. Only the new triumphant chart of Ethelgard will remain." A final act of vandalism. Elias was returned to his workshop under heavy guard one final time, ostensibly to draw a clean, final chart showing only the 12 degrees south coordinate. He sat before his magnificent, dream-made creation. The alabaster atlas lay before him, a massive, detailed lie that might, against all reason, be about to reveal a staggering truth. While Finch and his men prepared the new navigational equipment, Elias dipped his pen in a flask of concentrated, indelible green ink. He did not draw the final map. Instead, he worked swiftly and furiously on the original atlas. Using the green ink, he scrawled a single small, crucial addition to the coast near the newly affirmed location of Port Providence, 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south. It was a tiny, easily missed symbol, a cluster of 3 stylized stars, mirroring the constellation Crux, or the Southern Cross. It was a purely visual cue, a personal memory of the dream, a small piece of beauty Elias had intended to add before Finch's involvement. Crucially, he added a tiny, almost microscopic note next to the stars. RV. RV stood for Rhys Vance. Elias knew Captain Silas Vance was dead, but he had heard the stories of Vance's first mate, Rhys, a sharp, observant man. If the Veritas was lost, and if one of the crew survived with even a fragment of the map, the 3 stars and the faint initials would be a sign, a clue meant only for a man who had survived the first failure, an acknowledgement of the shared deception. It was a final, desperate act of vandalism, not against the crown, but against the inevitability of human greed. Elias was resigned to his fate, but he would not let his dream fall completely into Finch's calculating hands. The second ship, the Veritas, Latin for truth, was smaller, faster, and crewed by a cynical, pragmatic lot. Lord Finch had ensured that the captain, a cautious man named Commander Thomas Audley, knew the official coordinate had been a sham and that the only hope lay in the revised position, 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south. Finch, eager to protect his secret, did not sail with the Veritas. Instead, he dispatched a trusted, ruthless agent named Master Jareth to act as Audley's political overseer, ensuring the crew's loyalty and, more importantly, securing any documentation of the discovery before Audley could communicate directly with the Queen. Commander Audley was given a newly drafted, clean chart that showed only the 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south coordinate for Port Providence, drawn by an assistant under Finch's close supervision. The Queen's great map, containing Elias Thorne's hidden cipher, remained locked in London. The navigator's reluctance. Audley navigated the Veritas with grim determination. They followed the path suggested by the currents, sailing swiftly and without incident, passing the desolate location where the Hesperus had been lost. Audley's navigator, a sharp young man named John Rhys, was related to the first mate lost on the Hesperus. He approached the voyage with deep skepticism, haunted by the fate of the first expedition. "Commander," Rhys noted one evening, studying the newly drawn chart, "this land, Ethelgard, the detail is immense. It suggests a civilization capable of stone building, yet it appears on no historical chart. I do not trust this London cartographer's dream. We do not trust the man, Master Reese. We trust the Queen's desperation and Finch's greed. This coordinate is mathematically derived from the first failure. It is our last best guess. We sail until we reach 40 degrees west, 12 degrees south, and if we find nothing, we turn for home and report the deception. The appearance of land. The Veritas had been at sea for just over 2 months when, late one afternoon, they reached the calculated position. The sun was dipping toward the western horizon. The ocean was empty. Again. A palpable dread settled over the crew. They had sailed 1,000 miles beyond the point of the first failure, only to find another void. Master Jareth, Finch's agent, immediately turned hysterical. "Audley, you have failed! Turn the ship! We must return and report this conspiracy! Thorn has tricked us all!" Audley, however, remained calm. He had been expecting it. He ordered the ship to sail slowly westward, continuing to follow the faint, invented contour lines of the sea bottom that Elias had meticulously drawn onto the chart based on his theory of continental plates. Just before twilight, a nervous lookout screamed from the masthead, "Land! Land on the starboard bow!" It was not a continent. It was not a mountain. It was merely a faint, low smudge on the horizon, slightly north and west of the coordinates. It was a landmass that appeared only because the Veritas was sailing exactly the opposite direction than expected, sailing west when all logic dictated sailing north toward known coasts. The next morning the mist lifted, and the crew of the Veritas gazed upon the impossible. It was land, not the mythical grand continent of the Alabaster Atlas, but a chain of surprisingly large, high islands. They were heavily forested, volcanic in origin, and nestled exactly in the current convergence Elias had theorized. Master Jareth was beside himself. "This is not Aethelgard! This is not the continent of the charts!" Audley, however, gripped the rail, his skepticism dissolving into awe. "It is land, Master Jareth, uncharted, untouched land, exactly where the cartographer said it would be, give or take 30 miles. Perhaps Aethelgard is merely the main island, or perhaps the rest is submerged."